Hello, hello. This is Postgres FM, episode number 105. My name is Nikolay, founder of Postgres AI, and as usual, my co-host is Michael, founder of PG Master. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Nikolay.
So you chose interesting topic. Is it interesting? I'm kidding, but it's not technical at all, right?
It depends how far we get into it.
Yeah. So we talk about startups, Postgres startups, ecosystem maybe for Postgres companies and new companies, young companies. We saw many of them launched in previous years. And recently, starting last year, we started observing some of them closing, which is natural for startups. Yeah, let's discuss this.
Yeah, sounds great. I thought it might be interesting for people. I think not everybody pays as close attention to this as yourself and I do. So I think there'll be people out there that won't have heard of a bunch of these companies. I think it'll be really interesting to discuss what some of them are doing, what kind of categories there are, how they run, like what kind of business models are popping up, what problems they're solving, that kind of thing. But the reason I brought this up now, I mean, I'm kind of surprised we haven't done this kind of thing already. But the reason I brought this up now is I saw a tweet, maybe some other, it got a few hundred likes. So I think probably a few people in the Postgres world have seen it already. But I think it was semi-serious prediction, which was, and it was from a guy called Dax Rad. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it that right. He's a bit of a joker online, does quite a few funny tweets. But I think this was semi-serious, and it was a prediction that over the next 12 months, Postgres startups are going to get decimated. And that was the whole tweet, definitely in character for trolling. But I thought it was interesting and funny. And there were some funny responses too. But that prompted me to think, what is the Postgres startup ecosystem like right now?
I think first of all, it's serious, very serious. And second, I think it's wrong because it talks about next 12 months, not talking about what already happened. Last 12 months, I think it already happened. Because if you think like, even if 3 startups closed, that means did we have 30, right? Because what does this word mean? It means
I did look it up. Because that was part of the replies. But I think there's two definitions. One is the kind of the strict old school definition, which was, from the Roman times, 1 in 10
punishment
dies. Yeah, exactly. But I don't think that's what's generally meant when the word decimated is used in English.
It's not dies. Other 9 kill this guy. This is how it was originally. It was terrible, right? Like,
well, it was like a group punishment.
One random guy is killed by others, right? So this. I don't know why we discuss it. It's not relevant, maybe.
It's very relevant to the tweet, right? Decimated, but I think the more normal definition, the more normal use of the word decimated means like a lot of them will die.
Reduction, right? Reduction of number.
Big reduction.
Yeah, well, actually, in the world of startups, usually 9 of 10 die, not 1 of 10, right? It's vice versa. Naturally, because lack of product market fit or something like bad execution and so on, which usually looks like we cannot raise next round, right? But back to my idea, what happened in the last 12 months. I know at least 3 startups which are dead now. Did we have 30 startups before that? If we did, did we have more? I think no, actually. Postgres-related startups.
It depends how you define them, and I think even some of the ones you're potentially talking about weren't Postgres only. So it depends how wide you cast the net.
The biggest, Ivan.com from Finland, I consider it a startup because I remember they were super small and then they skyrocketed and raised. They are Postgres-related because they started, I think, with Postgres and Kafka. It's like alternative to AWS services, but multi-cloud, like single interface to multiple clouds, but Postgres including, right? And they had great Postgres materials and so on.
I think I misheard. What was the name of the company? How do you spell it?
Aiven. Ivan.
Oh, it must be a different Ivan to the one I'm thinking of because they seem to still be going strong.
No. They didn't close. I mean, what I tried to say, I just reflected your words about not only they are strong, although I heard about laid offs, but they also raised the maximum number of VC capital among all, let's call it Postgres related companies, right? So I just reflected the idea that some of them are not purely Postgres, and these guys are not purely Postgres. Of course, they have MySQL and a lot of Elastic and everything, right? Yeah, I wanted to say we have a big range of very big companies, and Ivan, at least according to Crunchbase, raised $420 million. It's insane, right?
Oh, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, I think they were first who reached the like kind of unicorn label among Postgres. Let's call it Postgres related startups. The other one, I think, TimescaleDB also reached this good mark, right? Like unicorn means valuation exceeding 1 billion. By the way, speaking of words, 420 it's easy to remember sitting in California. Yeah, but it's impressive amount of money, and we have Supabase Timescale, which raised more than 100 million, right?
Neon 2 over 100 million.
Great, congrats everyone.
Hazura
Great.
as well.
Yeah, Hazura. Yeah. By the way, I stopped hearing about Hazura for a couple of years already somehow. And by the way, they are also starting from Postgres. I think they expanded to SQL Server and everything. Yeah, we didn't see collapse of really big startups, but smaller, and I think I would say Ottertune managed to be already like mid-size, because how much they raised? 16 million? 15?
I saw 12, but I don't know what they raised before that.
I think 15 or 16 was the total I saw. Honestly, if we say database startups, this money should be not Series A, because database startups require more money, I think, if to go serious. And we have a lot of very small things. So let's talk about those who closed, like Ottertune, one of the latest news. Who else?
There's only one other that I know of, and that was Snaplet.
Snaplet, yeah.
It's not really in the same category, but it's kind of in our space of making tools.
Yeah. What about Bit.io? Bit.io, it was a nice idea. You have a spreadsheet, you just throw it to browser uploading, right? And it immediately creates Postgres node with table and with data.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like super cloud approach, like very, very cloud. Like you just drop a spreadsheet and start running SQL queries to it. It was a nice idea, but they closed last year, I guess.
Okay.
And similarly to Ottertune, they did very, 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 very short notice for their customers, which is, I think, very bad behavior. Not good. Like 30 days or so. Get your data.
Yes. It's difficult, isn't it?
So these three startups, I like Snaplet, Bit.io, and Ottertune are closed. And my question is, how many startups do we have Postgres related in this broader term in general? Maybe 30, right? But 30 is quite a lot in my head. And it means that maybe we already have the decimation complete, So
easiest prediction to make is something that's already happened.
Right. Well, no, I mean, next 12 months, maybe it will happen again.
What do you think?
I don't know. By the way, I somewhere had a list of Postgres-related startups. I think it didn't exceed 30.
Yeah, I've made a bit of a list, but I didn't know what should count. Like, how many years is it still count as a startup?
Right. What is startup?
Yeah. What about companies that haven't gone down the VC route, that are kind of like, do they count? So I think it's really difficult. And then especially if you start to include companies that do tools for more than one type of database, like we had an acquisition recently in the Postgres space where Timescale acquired a company called Popsicle, cool name, by the way, but they did tools they did a tool that worked with Postgres, but not only Postgres. And there's been loads of companies like that I wouldn't have thought to include if I was making this list. So it's a very, very tricky definition. But to be fair, Dax did actually qualify it a little bit in some replies, saying it was about the crop of companies that have popped up to often managed Postgres services, which does limit it.
It's very different.
There can't be that many of those, maybe 5 or 10.
Right. And yeah, we cannot take existing companies which started doing this because they already cannot be considered startups, right? So
Right?
so it means
Yeah.
we talk about only like very few companies. I think not more than 10, because most managed Postgres services I can think of, they are done by companies which exist many years. So Supabase, Neon, Tembo, who else?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how some of the others are monetizing. Like, for example, there are people like FerretDB offering Mongo compatible Postgres. I don't think they're offering a managed
Hydra.
service though. Is it PG Edge as well? Are they doing managed?
Should be. I don't follow.
I think so. PeerDB as well. I don't know if they're doing managed. I don't know, like if you would count it.
They don't have managed Postgres. They have managed replication for Postgres.
There you go. So it's. I don't think they count Index's prediction. So it's a tricky one to. I suspect it did its job and it was pure engagement farming, and I've fallen for it. But in the grand scheme of things, I was most keen just to discuss, how do you see Postgres startups at the moment, and are there any gaps that you'd really like to see maybe new startups pop up, or what kind of problems some of these are solving, which ones are most important to you, like that kind of thing?
Well, I think I see things very differently than a few years ago. I think a lot of new people came, which is great, from different market segments, like even from database, from different database systems, for example, right? Like Tembo is one of great examples here.
And by the way, congrats to them. They just announced a raise, 14 million.
Especially congrats for Cybertruck to Rai. Yeah.
We'll link that up in the
with license plate startup, very relevant to today's discussion, right?
True.
I think we have very different types of companies and many attempts, and it's interesting time right now, because if we talk about VC, maybe it's harder to raise, but at the same time we know it's harder to find job, which also means that it's easier to find people.
Yeah.
And for those who make startups, it's some like additional window of opportunity. So it's a mixed situation right now. Like you might fail to raise, but you might find good co-founder, for example, technical, right? And
yeah, true.
And build something. Yeah, I'm honestly not standard startup guy at all. I'm slow, bootstrapping. I'm just observing this like VC. If you raise, for example, $10-20 million, build something which brings you some like significant money, and then you need to shut down your company because you didn't have 10x growth per year. It's weird. For VCs, it's probably like a failure, right? Because they expect hypergrowth. But why do we need the hypergrowth in Postgres ecosystem? Maybe we should have good companies which have normal growth, like 30% per year, and that's it. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm in the same boat as you in terms of my own companies, trying to grow it sustainably with customer revenue, customer funded, bootstrapped at the beginning. So trying to do things slow and steady. But to do that, I felt like I had to pick a very, very small niche of a product, a very, very kind of low surface area, compete in like a very, very small area. But I do think there are problems in databases that do require a lot more investment up front. And those things are harder to do self-funded slowly. I think they do require a lot of capital. And then the only model at the moment for that is either, well, I guess there are examples, even in the Postgres ecosystem, of companies funding their own development there, like back to the hyperscalers, but even so obviously companies like AWS, RDS, that was all funded through Amazon profits, and Microsoft as well, Google. But in the Postgres space, Crunchy Data, for example, have been investing in their own platform that presumably largely funded through their own consulting business and then customer revenues. But it's like yours, right? Your business is also mixed consulting revenue. So some of these other companies I see are offering kind of service-based business models as well as the kind of more VC-friendly subscriptions or hosting, like usage fees.
What is good about this all? It's definitely ecosystem is still growing, expanding, and we see the growth of companies which use Postgres in so many market segments everywhere. It's everywhere. Like, and it's great. We see many customers who need help in many aspects. So I agree. We must divide companies by like what they do, goals. Like if you want to change something in database itself, like build new type of Postgres itself or rewrite part of Postgres, it requires a lot of effort, and you must have very long vision. If you raise like just 1 million, for example, and next year VC will say either raise or close, basically, because you don't have customers. This is not how it will work, right? So fundamental things require a lot of effort and maybe money also. So Neon is a good example. They change.
Yeah, great example.
Yeah, and also AudioDB, which it's still under development, and Alexander Korotkov joined Supabase, also good driver probably to continue development of AudioDB, because what is there we as Postgres users do need, right? Features which are designed there. Also, I would like to mention here like historical things. If maybe you watched this, Michael Stonebreaker, who is like father of Postgres, receiving Turing Award 10 years ago or so. He had a great lecture about startups in database startups, because he is like not only father of Postgres, he's father of database startups as well, participating and doing this a lot. So it was a great lecture. I highly recommend it. I remember he was comparing fundamental database startups as riding a bicycle across America, like downhill, uphill. Like sometimes it feels great, sometimes it's like almost killing you. Very good lecture, actually. I enjoyed. So this is fundamental thing. But there are other types of Postgres-related startups as well, and I think good things should happen when we saw in Postgres area, we saw first acquisition by Microsoft. It was Citus, right?
Yeah.
Which is quite also fundamental, I would say. All right. It's not Postgres itself, but it's a significant layer of addition to Postgres.
It's actually the one area that I would like to see more deep work done. I think we've got a lot of bases covered in the Postgres ecosystem, but there's this kind of like elephant in the room with PlanetScale and Vitess. I feel like we had great guests on recently, and I've since seen somebody describe, I think it was actually Arca from Notion, he described what Sammy and the Figma team are doing as somewhat starting to build the Vitess for Postgres. And I thought that was a really, like, I hadn't clicked that that's what they were doing, but that is kind of what they're doing. So that feels like a gap at the moment that probably does require a lot of development and could be funded by a VC-backed startup. But that's the one area that I don't see what currently being done.
Right, but then there are several acquisitions, I think, for smaller startups. And we saw also a few companies which are Postgres related in YC. Like PeerDB,
which
right?
Is that the first time, right? PeerDB and then ParadeDB, are they the first Postgres related companies to get into YC?
No, Supabase was there as well.
Oh, of course. Right. Great shout. Yeah, good point.
Someone else.
Sorry, Supabase, I forgot.
Yeah, maybe someone else. So, but there are bootstrappers as well. Is PGAnalyze bootstrapper?
Yeah, I had a list of bootstrappers that I wanted to give a shout out to. Yeah, PGAnalyze is a great example, but also dbeaver. these bootstrappers don't get as much because they don't raise money often. Well, never. They don't get as much press. So yeah, the other ones I had to give a shout out to were Egger Apps, who make Postico, my favorite little Mac client for Postgres. Postgres Compare, which is run by an old friend and colleague of mine, a guy called Neil Anderson. And also there's another monitoring company. So PG Analyze, of course, but with Lucas and the team.
Analyze, I see it very often lately.
Nice.
Do you consider CoreRoot as a Postgres startup? It's very strange to classify, right? Because they have good support for Postgres for self-managed installations, I think, because they do eBPF monitoring, right? It's like, I like the idea if we have many Postgres nodes, and not only Postgres, we don't need to install anything like additional extensions, but we do need to have access to like
machine.
Right. Yeah. So it's a self-managed situation, and they just observe whole traffic and perform a lot of interesting stuff, including like flame graphs. Historically, you choose the period and understand what Postgres did in that period in terms of what CPU was doing, and also in query analysis.
Yeah.
Query analysis.
I forgot them, but I think it's because they're not they're not only Postgres, right? So it's
not only Postgres, but the founder was creating. It's the same founder who created Okimeter, and it had very good Postgres monitoring, one of the best I consider still. And last year I had the overview of Postgres monitoring systems at PGCon, and people liked a lot my slide deck, so I know what I'm talking about. And Peter Zaitsev joined him recently as co-founder.
Yeah, very cool.
So it means serious thoughts about databases. Of course, maybe not Postgres only, but MySQL, but definitely serious about databases. So we can consider, like, this is the problem. Fundamental, not fundamental, bootstrapped, VC-backed, Postgres only, not Postgres only. So many dimensions for this classification.
Well, and that's part of what I wanted to discuss here. It does feel quite rich at the moment. It does feel like we have a lot of options, and that I feel like that's really positive. And there's quite a lot of innovation going on, not only at the startups. It feels like there's quite a lot of innovation going on, even at some of the larger, older companies working on Postgres things. Maybe I'm biased and rose-tinted glasses, but it feels really positive to me at the moment.
I think the idea of that tweet was the company who raised a lot are in danger.
Interesting. You think?
Yeah, because they need to raise further, and if they are not dealing with AI, for example, VCs won't give them money, right?
Maybe.
It's very silly thought, but it's actually in many cases true.
Well, it will be interesting to see if any of them do, but it also feels like the ones that I'm aware of, they have such good business models. Like if the business model's working, getting companies to host their database on your system, the ones that do well will grow with you and pay you more each month, month on month. And it's very difficult to move off, right? It's expensive, it's risky. So the fundamentals of the...
Imagine you grow only 50% per year or just 100% per year. For VCs, it's not enough at some point.
Good point.
It's tough.
But if we're talking about 100 million in the bank, even if you hire a lot of people, that's a serious amount of money.
Right, but how many managed Postgres services do we have already? And RDS is still the king of the hill, right? So I don't know. And is it still expanding the user base in terms of managed Postgres?
Good question. I did look. If we're going back to the tweet, like if that's the prediction, why is it the prediction? I personally think the number of databases is growing really quickly. The number of startups seems to be exploding at the moment because of the AI boom. A lot of the AI use cases do use vectorized, like they do need a vector database. Postgres is, because of PG Vector, positioned really well for vector.
Do you think so?
Database. Personally, yes. Do you not think so?
I have doubts because it's not in core. If you check Postgres documentation, you don't see vector at all. This is huge chance to lose this battle.
Yeah.
In my opinion, this is serious. Like, it might look so silly, simple, and so on, but it's super serious problem Postgres currently has. And PG Vector and all efforts. It's good that all major managed services quickly added PG Vector, but they usually lag in terms of version. It means that they lag to deliver the best performance, for example, which is quickly improving in latest versions, and so on and so on. Of course, this is a battle that's it's happening, but it's a barrier in minds, and some folks will not pass this barrier. I mean, if you not lazy, you will quickly realize it's kind of a zoo. It's a bazaar. It's open source. That's why, like, it's a bazaar. So we have many options. You need to quickly understand the options. But I recently had this customer. They said, okay, we are on RDS. I think it was Aurora. And we have PG Vector, blah, blah, blah. And I see they use very old version of PG Vector, much older than even already available on Aurora, but they didn't upgrade because to upgrade you need to switch to different. I don't remember. Some problems were happening, and this whole thing is so fragmented. Well, I mean, vector story is very fragmented right now, and the only path to make it strong is to put it inside Postgres. But we discussed that there are problems with that.
Well, I don't think I disagree personally. I think if you're really a startup and you can't keep PG Vector up to date, you have bigger problems than, that feels to me such an easy thing for you to do if what I'm saying is true. If there are lots of companies that want vector databases right now and are willing to go with Postgres, I personally think it being out of core is a benefit right now because it means it can get bumps in version really quickly. Like we see, I know they're not technically major versions, but 0.5, 0.6, 0.7 have all come with quite big functionality improvements. And if it was in core, we wouldn't have seen those. It would have taken years. So personally, I think there are advantages in that area. I've just remembered though, I actually think the prediction was made partly because of two other reasons. I think it's partly that Planet Scale is very marketing level kind of attractive to kind of medium sized, like non-AI kind of SaaS businesses. I don't know how many non-AI businesses are popping up right now, but the ones that are, I think that they offer a very attractive proposition, like kind of like Mongo did before, but with SQL. And then I think the other driving force for the prediction is probably the number of SQLite or SQLite or SQLite or however you pronounce it. There are a lot of hosted SQLite companies popping up saying, actually, all you need is this. Like for a long, long time, you can get by with SQLite, keep things simple. So I think at least that part of Twitter that I'm seeing is talking about those topics a bit more, and that might be why they think the Postgres startups might struggle, rather than a more nuanced take on vector databases. But I might have totally misunderstood. What do you think?
Hard to say. I don't know.
I just remembered there's one that I completely forgot. Have you heard of Nile? Nile?
Yeah.
Because they popped up quite like relatively recently in the grand scheme of things, talking about SaaS, like running a regular SaaS on Postgres and some innovations in that area. So that could be interesting. But they're another one that are offering a managed service again.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Talking about this lack of being in core, of course, I agree with you about the pace of development. It's great, and maybe things will change in the future. But it's just so sad that everyone has everything in documentation, like take Mongo, Elastic, everyone, like any major database system. They talk about vectors. Postgres documentation doesn't talk about vectors at all, right? I mean, it talks about arrays, but it's not like different, right? So maybe at some point it will go to core. I hope it won't be late, right?
But just to push you a little bit, the Superbase documentation talks about vectors. The Neon documentation,
RDS, Cloud SQL, all of them.
Yeah, but people are still then going with Postgres. So what's the problem?
The problem is that you need to spend time to choose and understand all the options here, because options are quite different everywhere.
But that would be true even if it was in the Postgres docs too. In fact, one more option.
Maybe.
Anything you would like to see? Anything, like, if anybody's listening, wanting to do a startup or like get inspired, is there any kind of area you'd like to see more innovation in?
Of course. And by the way, Temba is doing good steps in this direction. So I think, 37 Signals idea about moving out of cloud. Right?
I thought you were going to say moving to, so they've also done this once product that runs on SQLite, but no, the moving out of the cloud one. Yes.
Yeah, moving out of cloud and having greater level of control over your database. Direct access to files, for example, and so on, which is not possible for managed Postgres services usually. We discussed it a few times. Good thing that, for example, Crunchy Bridge provides full-fledged super user.
Mm-hmm.
So I expect, actually, Cytos co-founders, they launched new startup as well, right? And they do Postgres as well.
Yeah, good point.
UbiCloud, right?
That was it, yeah. I forgot them, yeah, good point.
The idea is great. You can install it anywhere. You have full access, but it's like the simplicity of management is similar to you have in cloud. You can do it with Supabase as well, by the way. I think you can host yourself. It's great. So in this area, I expect good shifts in the future, because I think demand will be growing. People who are like already say like we've been in cloud enough. We want to reduce overhead, how much we spend, and so on. Of course, some people will say cloud is great. I understand this, but I think this party will grow as well, like an anti-cloud party, let's say.
And I think it might also be a little bit like stage of company. I can imagine a lot of startups going with the cloud initially, and then like 37 Signals, perhaps a bit earlier than 37 Signals did, maybe then moves workloads back off. So I could definitely see both being true.
Yes. So, for example, Neon fully betting everything should be cloud. I understand that, but I also understand like them we pay like 5 times more than they could. So why do we do this? Like, that's not. Yeah. I know small companies which also understand that they don't want to pay a lot, and they are good technically, so they are successful and happy to be not in cloud or in very like low cost cloud, for example. And Postgres management there is interesting because you want all the features but don't want all the overhead. This is interesting. In general, like, I don't know what will happen, but it's normal for startups to die, especially if they are VC backed.
Yep.
Because VCs put a lot of pressure, especially after like 3 to 5 years of existence of the company. I learned it hard way with my second startup, like 10 years ago, when I realized like 3 years passed and we need to move on, and like, huge optimization was needed. It was successfully done, but it was very painful. So it's good if you know this in advance. that there is some like period of time when you will need to raise again, or you will just be closed. Right. Yeah. In my case, it was not closure. It was just a huge optimization to be very profitable at some point. Yeah. That's why I like the bootstrapped cases as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm glad we got a chance to shout some of them out, because they don't always get the attention they deserve.
If bootstrapped company doesn't die in first year and the founders still believe into this idea, it's much more stable company actually, because they don't have pressure from VCs. But probably they have much less chances to grow significantly, right?
Well, it depends, right? Like, I actually forgot a couple of similar companies that are bootstrapped or mostly bootstrapped, or at least they've stopped raising and they're doing really well. Like at JetBrains, a really, really old company, going from strength to strength.
King of bootstrapped companies, I think.
There are some examples of companies that have scaled to the same levels as some VC-backed companies,
right,
without needing to. So kudos to them as well.
Right. So my conclusion is like I expect more closures, and it's interesting to observe the situation. And unfortunately, I think closures will happen with companies who raised a lot, or they will need to change things a lot.
Interesting. Well, I would be surprised. So call me naive, but my prediction would be that none of them do close, at least in the next 12 months. So let's see. I'll be rooting for them anyway. In fact, all the Postgres startups, I guess, we'll be rooting for. So
the ecosystem is quite interesting and with challenges, but it's still growing, I think. And I think it's interesting to observe the further growth.
Yeah. Should be fun anyway. Thanks so much, Nikolay. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, thank you. See you next time. Bye.
See you next time. Bye.